everyone. Welcome back to the long hiatus of the MVP podcast, quarantine edition. We have a very special guest, Natasha French, with us. Natasha, hello.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, James.
You're quite welcome. Natasha is known as a digital marketer and sales strategist for technology companies. We've had the pleasure of working with Natasha over the last couple of weeks and months here with MVP Interactive. And so thrilled to have you. And I think, like many people in this moment of uncertainty and quarantine, it gives us all a opportunity to kind of work on some other projects, and knowing that a lot of businesses really stuck on hold. And so it's nice to be able to kind of get our content streams back going and get the resurgence of our podcast. And so it's great to have you, and thank you so much for your time.
No, I'm excited to be on.
Awesome. Well, so as we mentioned, Natasha has a decorated past, quite honestly, in terms of a career path. But obviously, we're here to talk about digital marketing and sales strategies for technology companies. So, Natasha, one of the things that we like to do is give our audience an opportunity to learn a little bit more about yourself and your background, and I guess life's journey that led you into this industry.
Yeah, so definitely, as you said, it's not your straightforward background, but it all kind of goes back to where I started my career in storytelling, engaging consumers through that. So started as a journalist doing stuff at CNN on international news gathering, part of that. And I always like to start there because it really, my love of telling stories. And my love of technology finally merged. So, worked a lot with a lot of companies in house, doing marketing and communications for them in very niche markets. And one thing I found was the technology piece that I loved, and being able to work with mid-size or small companies or even large companies that were maybe pivoting to help really take their product or service and find the right audience and help it grow. And so, having worked for a lot of companies in the risk management world, I spent some time in DC and Chicago. I moved back to LA, where I'm originally from. And, the tech scene was resurging here about 10 years ago, and kind of just dove in there. And, at that time, I think, every new app was coming to
Sure.
market, and
Yeah.
really found a love of how do you help these small companies find those audiences they can really sell their product. But on the other side, having worked for corporations and worked with larger brands, how do you actually educate and talk to brands about what these new technologies do? So when I was in LA, I probably launched every single mobile parking app known to mankind, because we know we have parking problems. The ironic part about it is I usually use valet, but there's even that for that now. But how I kind of fell into this is, for the past 5 years, I was working with a hologram company, and back in the day, I didn't even, for me, a hologram was what you saw on a baseball card.
Sure.
And what I really thought was so cool was, how consumers work, actually engaging with brands became very different with um, mobile phones. We have kind of a tool in your hand, and if you could make that more immersive with augmented reality, virtual reality, holograms, AI, just kind of became just infatuated with this whole world. And the thing that I really loved was going back to the storytelling piece, was using this new technology to help brands connect more with the consumer and help tell their brand story and engage that consumer. So what I've been doing and been loving having an opportunity to work with you guys is, how do you bring these new technologies to market and educate the marketplace? And the more thing is, how do fans and consumers have fun with this stuff? I think there's so much cool stuff out there, and if we can allow consumers to test it and use it and experience it, and if a brand happens to sponsor that experience, better yet, but it's a win-win for both sides. And
Sure.
so, yeah, it's kind of where I am now, is just really helping. My big thing is, I wanna make sure that all of these new technologies are successful. And what I've seen a lot is sometimes it's a check the box mentality, and brands haven't taken time to really how do you really use this technology in the right way? And so working with companies like yourself, it's been great to kind of see, what really cool products you have, and then how do we help educate the brands on how do you properly use it to engage, whether it's a fan or a consumer, and we can successfully see these stories using the different type of technologies that we're going to dive into.
Sure, sure. So, okay. So, before we get into the specific technologies or maybe some of the strategies, I'm interested to learn a little bit more about the storytelling piece and if there had been any correlation or education during your time at the news network. Now, obviously, being in an environment where the news, most people are really tied to the television screen, trying to learn what the updates are with the pandemic that we're dealing with, and there's a constant news cycle that just seems to be flipping every 24 hours. And so, from your interest and knowledge of creating stories, how much of that was really developed, at your days at the news company?
Yeah, what always came down to when you work, there's the feature stories you're telling, and then when you're working kind of in I worked in the newsroom, so it's like the day to day, and at that time it was doing the September 11th attacks, right? And so
Hmm.
kind of like what we're dealing with today, and you kind of realize life stops for a second and you kind of reassess what is important. But what's always going to be the same, whether it's a breaking news story or a feature story or documentary, is that connection with the viewer and that connection with the reader. And that's where I think the storytelling piece is so important, because it's more about how can I tell a story that I'm going to get across, to that viewer or to that reader that might resonate with them, right? I will tell a very different story to a 14-year-old kid than I might tell to a grandparent or to my own parents,
Sure.
because it's not relevant. So I think it goes back to personalizing, having that human connection, especially with news like today. It's like always, if something happened, a role that you would play as a producer is you go find someone who can verify that story, tell that story through the eyes of a person, not just, an authoritative person just giving you updates, but to really personalize that story with the hopes that you're connecting with someone on the other end, that reader or that viewer. Um, and so I think that's what's really important, whether it's a news story, but then on the documentary side, or even when you're doing brand storytelling, you need to identify who your audience is and then really be able to capture their attention by a story, and then you add those visualizations, because you always have to say, like, if you're physically not there, and I'm right now in at Los Angeles, near the beach. If I don't turn on a television or don't turn on my computer, to me it's probably a really nice day,
Sure.
right? um,
Right. Right.
and I could just pretend everything's fine in the world, where once I turn something on and kind of the reality sets in, I want to hear a story of, someone who's a young professional. How are they being affected? How are my friends and colleagues being affected? So, for the storytelling piece of it, whether it's news or whatnot, it's so important to know your audience, and to really resonate on emotional level, but also just making sure that it is the factual piece too.
Yeah.
And you're not making a lot of assumptions, and I think that's where, on the news cycle piece of it, it's been interesting to kind of see the evolution
Sure.
of storytelling, because you also now, like, what do you believe,
Right.
Um, so that was kind of when I worked at that time, it was a very intense time. I was working with journalists that were in Baghdad every day. I was kind of their lifeline to let them know things, how things were going. But we always wanted to make sure that we told that story with the facts, but then also with that emotional connection to the reader, the viewer as well.
Sure, sure. And it sounds a lot like, a segue into marketing in terms of tailoring a particular message to the right audience. And so maybe you can kind of talk a little bit more about if, some of the strategies that you have deployed or have done with these technology companies to make sure that, because one of the things that we hear in the live event business and the technology business is that you don't want to use technology for the sake of technology, right? And so, as selfish and/or opportunistic as it could be to kind of shoehorn tech as a technology company into an experience, you're really doing an ultimate disservice to everyone involved if that's just your motive, right? And so, talk to us a little bit about maybe using technology or marketing strategies to tell the right story to a different target audience.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you said it really well. I call it the check the box mentality, right? We saw a lot of failures in emerging tech, whether it was AR, VR, holograms, because people are just checking a box and doing something really cool, but that they never had a goal in mind.
Right.
And it's just like whether you're doing a traditional, marketing campaign and sending out collateral or doing a stunt, at an event, it still has to have a goal. And if you don't have that goal and then you throw in new technology, that's a failure before it starts. And when I talk about goals, I'm talking about, are you using new technology for user generated content? Are you trying to just get a PR headline? Are you trying to engage an audience just to launch a new product and you just want to do something super cool? Let's look at that goal and then align the technology with that goal in mind, because it then comes back to the content, right? You can have a super cool, immersive experience, but if the content doesn't resonate with that end user,
Mm-hmm.
they're just gonna be like, "That was cool," but, and they won't really take you have to have an emotional connection. So I think what I've seen is 2 streets. Is one is, on the technology company side, what has been very successful is how do you market your technology in a digestible way because it's so new, like, some of this tech is so cutting edge.
Sure.
Um, in our world we live in, we can spit out all these acronyms and we're doing this and it's gesture based but in a someone who might have never put a VR headset on or someone who have never taken a phone like Pokemon Go and like experienced AR, they're not sure what that is, right? And they're not sure how is this important to me and how is this, going to make my life any better.
Sure.
So on the marketing and technology companies, I always say it's really important to know what you actually do and to categorize yourself in a way that is digestible and understandable to the end user.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I was working, for example, when I'm working with companies like yourself, you have some really cool VR experiences, AR experiences, but for the brand that's working with you, what does that AR experience actually mean or do? How does the user like have a phone in their hand and what are they seeing? And is that more of an interactive experience? Is it an experience that's going to get them to buy their product? Or so for the tech companies, it's important to one, be able to clearly define what your technology does. Important to understand what is that customer experience when they're using that technology, right?
Yep.
From A to Z, how will that person immerse with my brand? And one thing that's really important too for the tech companies is let's say you're one part of that tech. So let's say you're just the app on the phone. It's still important to tell the whole story of how that user is going to experience that app on the phone. How is that content going to live after you do the experience? Is it shareable? How can that content live beyond it? How does the experience start before that user might get to the stadium, right? Let's say you buy a ticket,
Mm-hmm.
you can then send an email saying download our app and engage with us before you get to the stadium, meet other fans. Or so I think it's really important too for the tech companies to not just silo yourself one moment, but and I'm talking more about these are more like immersive tech companies doing these consumer engagements,
Mm-hmm.
but understanding kind of from the start to the end, what does that 360-degree view look like for the consumer? Because I think that helps the brand better understand, oh, now this fits into my whole marketing campaign. You have a touch point in the beginning, you have a touch point during the experience, and then you have a touch point at the end. On the flip side, for brands and organizations looking to use technology, I emphasize a lot about what's the goal of using this new tech. And I think it's so important to not just use the tech to check a box, because as I mentioned earlier, that will be a failed experience, because just because it's cool doesn't mean it really ties in, the consumer knows what to do with this experience. Because one thing that's really important is, I'm sure you've downloaded apps before, and our attention spans, it's one of my favorite stats, is our less fish. I think the goldfish is at seconds, humans are at 8 seconds. So we have no attention span, right?
Sure.
The last time you try to download an app and it doesn't work, you probably give up,
Right.
because we are so impatient. And so with these new technology companies, you sometimes have that one shot for the technology to work. But sometimes the technology is so new, like if it's gesture based, there's only one gesture that this whole world knows, and it's a swipe, thanks to
Sure.
dating
Sure.
apps. And when you're working with these new gesture controlled experiences, you really have to think about, you know, this is so new for a consumer. I'm literally like moving my hand in air and something's happened. There's no tangible, like you're not touching something,
Right.
right? And so I think if you can explain that experience to people, that's really important on the marketing end, is easily describing what your tech does, how the user interacts with it, and then what is that end experience when that person uses it. For the technology company and for the brand side, when you're using new tech to market, it's so important to use the tech company as a partner. You're hiring these tech companies as the experts, and work with them. Be like, hey, what's worked before? What has you seen as success with consumers? What is really cool and cutting edge, but not so complicated that a consumer is going to get frustrated with it, because that's the last experience you want a consumer to have, is to be frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's I think you mentioned a key point, in terms of checking the boxes, right? And so one of the things that we constantly go through when a new client comes to us is really identify a lot of the times, what they think that they want isn't really what they need, and educating them as to what is the right technology. And as you mentioned, the acronyms and what have you, gets very confusing, and a marketer's definition of one technology could be slightly different than a technologist's definition of a technology, right? And so I think from our perspective, going through the creative process, going through the brainstorming, is really listening to the brand, listening to what their message is, and then using technology as the proper technology as the right conduit. And so that's always a fun and rewarding process for us, because, as you had mentioned, integrating, we become partners of these brands, right? And our clients. And so this isn't just, hey, buy the new cool tech toy. This is like, consumer engagement for the 21st century. And this is the newfound media. And so we want to make sure that the experience is good, it's memorable, and, the data-driven points are accomplished, and, what is the right technology for that experience. And so I think you're spot on with that. And that's very much a part of our process as well.
No, I love it. And one thing I forgot to mention too is, I it's funny, I do a ton of social media for all the people I've worked with my whole career. Like, I don't post anything, right? Like, so I am probably, you wouldn't even know I'm engaged, right? Because I have
Right.
nothing personally posted. But which is funny, like I wouldn't go to myself and be like, would I use this app to share? So I say that because it's really important to talk to who you're targeting and understand, like, what are 15-year-olds doing right now, right?
Sure.
Is it all on TikTok? Should my technology output be via TikTok if it's a social sharing experience, right? What are like I don't know, I guess Facebook's not cool anymore for some age generations. Like so I think it's so important to know what people are using as the output, if it's a shareable experience, or I know we're going to kind of talk about this later, but like right now everyone's at home, there aren't events to go to, right? So I think it's really important we look at some AR solutions at home, and we can talk about that in a bit. But it's understanding, like, what is that user going to experience now,
Mm-hmm.
and how is that user going to take in that content, how that user is going to respond to that content. Like I used to call like friends that had high school kids, like, hey, what are your kids using these days? And I think it's so
Sure.
important to
Sure.
really understand like what's cool because you could build this really cool tech, but if no one uses it, or no one gets it, it's not going to be cool. And I think the fun thing what you guys are doing and what I love doing is like creating these experiences that the end user is just like, this is the coolest thing I just
Right.
did. Like I
Yeah.
don't even know what happened, but I just throw a virtual baseball and like got to challenge myself against my favorite athlete, and like it's those moments that they're sharing with their family and friends, and whether it's from their couch through an AR app, or when we can go back into stadiums, it's there. But I think that's the cool thing about this tech, is creating not just an individual experience, but an experience that can be shared beyond with your friends and with your family. And it's just having those moments where like I think one of my favorite things is seeing when a kid gets as excited as like his grandfather, right?
Sure.
That
Sure.
technology is
Yeah.
like bridging that moment for them.
Yeah, exactly, and that is ultimately our goal with every new development. And as folks that are developing the technology like us, it can get you can fall down the rabbit hole very easily and quickly and deeply with making sure that every asset is proper, every mechanic is proper, and really lose sight of what the ultimate goal is. And really, to keep it simple, any new technology that goes out our door, there's just one question in mind, and it is, was it a good experience, right? And so you can do all the bells and whistles and design and over engineer an experience, but if it's not good, it's a waste. And so I think that's really important, and I think that is where these immersive technologies are the new frontier of where media is going, because of such the powerful messaging behind that experience. And from a marketing perspective, you can do all of the data analysis that you want and understand that millennials, their purchase power is coveted amongst all these brands, but what they value the most is experience, right? And so
Yeah.
great, like you have a buying generation that wants to attend events and concerts and games and all of these public gatherings to experience something. So how do you capitalize that as a brand and make sure that you are not just like the brand that's putting up a billboard or maybe doing a radio spot, leaning on technology to really connect as that new form of media. And so for someone that has been in this space for 10 years in different iterations, talk to us about the evolution of where you've seen, the trends of engagement and technology really merge with where brands are actually now no longer saying, "Oh, that's a nice to have; it's a must have."
Yeah, and it's funny, I was just about to say one thing, and it goes back to that user customer experience, is if you create something that enhances a moment, makes something easier for a person, that means the technology worked. If it's making it more difficult to get into where you're trying to go, you know, that's when technology can be a failure. Where I think it's really important, 10 years ago, it was all about apps, and like everyone was creating every single app you could imagine. But then I wish I had the stat, but I think there's a stat out there of actually how many apps people use daily, and I think it's like just
Mm.
that front screen right on your phone, which might be like 10, which is not many apps for how many
In
are
the
out.
realm of things, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you think about like what apps you use on a daily basis, um and the thing about that was it was capturing the audience, but back then it wasn't just, apps were so new too. So what I started noticing, the apps that were useful, like the parking app, or those that I was working with, and then I started working with like a food delivery app back in the day. But then there were apps that were like, is this truly helping the person? Could this better be used on a web medium? Do we really need an app for this? And then all of a sudden, every company was building an app, but maybe you just needed a mobile friendly version of your site, right? Like, and I think that's where with technology, you can have these great ideas, but you want to make sure that it makes sense for your brand. You just because one brand does it and had success doesn't mean it's right for your user. So, like, I've worked with a lot of companies, especially like with AI and with interfaces, where, for example, when I started working in the kind of augmented reality holographic space, a lot of these organizations were looking for like, let's get an AI personality who to interact with me at a bank. If you really think about who is actually going into banks right now, it is a lot older person, probably, and if you really took the time to go to the bank, you probably wanna talk to a human, like, if you
Sure.
actually, like, got in your car and went to a bank. So does an AI robot really, Pepper the robot, is that really gonna resonate with like an 80-year-old who's going into a bank to talk to a human who probably doesn't even have a cell phone, maybe, I don't know, or, you know, and that's when you have to make sure, like, is this technology actually enhancing the experience for the user, or is it now gonna make someone, like, angry at a 3-foot tall robot asking how they can help you?
Sure.
And I think that's really important when I use that example because I know, like, Pepper the robot, and we used to see a lot of them, and then I'm like, "Where'd all the peppers go?" It's like, and I think it's useful for some informational stuff and for the right place, but it doesn't work at everyone. It goes back to, like, who is your audience? Like, know that this technology might hinder the moment for someone as opposed to enhance that experience.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
think the same thing happened when the first time I did virtual reality, I did virtual it was a skiing experience, and I ski personally, so I put the headset on. They asked me if I wanted to stand on this, like, swivel board. I was like, "No, let's just start with the ground."
Sure.
And then all of a sudden he said, "Look down." I looked down, and all of a sudden he's like, "Look up." And I'm going like 80 miles per hour down a slope. And then all of a sudden I'm going off a jump and my knees buckled. I threw it off and I like fell.
Oh my
And I was like,
God.
it was the most out of body, like,
Yeah.
and it goes back to the content, like, right? Like, maybe that would have been fun for like a 14-year-old kid who like wanted that out of, but right, like that was the experience from like that was not a fun experience. And it took me a while to do VR again because I was like so nervous.
Traumatized. Yeah. You almost broke a bone there.
Yeah, I always say I fell VR skiing, which is really sad, but it's going back to, like, the content, knowing that user, and is that experience gonna enhance my day, or is it going to deter it? And I think that kinda goes across with everything from, streaming with AI experiences. Like, I think voice is great, like what we do with Siri and Alexa, and like how
Mhm.
voice has been it's like a part of our daily lives, right? But when that worked at your home, now you take voice to a mall. I don't want to go to a mall and have a public conversation if I'm going to buy like a personal item, right? So,
Sure.
like,
Sure.
that might not be the best tool for a large mall. Or I'm not going to go to a bank and be like yelling my code, to, and so I think it's going back to making sure the technology makes sense for your brand. It makes sense for your user. It makes sense for your consumer. Um, because every new tech doesn't mean it's the right tech for you.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's funny that you would mention the banking experience because just the other day, and I mean this is purely anecdotal, but given the environment that we're in with social distancing and really being quarantined to our homes, and attending these essential businesses, and banking is obviously one of them. But you had mentioned about that human interaction, and as I was in line, literally to get into the bank, there was an elderly woman who had never used her ATM machine. And so she was just, really looking to speak to someone to help her because she didn't know what to do. And at this particular branch, there was only one individual working, and every message, every sign that was in the branch was going to the ATM. If you need money, just go to the ATM. And this poor woman really had no idea how to interface with it. And so and then, publicly, that's an uncomfortable situation, because you want to help. I wanted to help, but that's very sensitive. That's private information. And for someone the first time using it, I mean, you can imagine the anxiety in terms of fraud, or she doesn't know me, and there's no level of relationship there. But so ultimately, the teller was able to assist her. But it's a very good point in really focusing in on the right technologies for the right environments and the right people. And so I guess that could be a good segue in terms of the environment that we're in right now, dealing with this pandemic. And the world is on one part on hold, but on the other side really moving to a new trajectory in how we interface, and how we're communicating with each other, right? Even now during this podcast, we're on a video chat. I see you through the eyes of a screen, and every single corporate meeting that we've had over the past month and a half has been done via teleconference or video conference. And so talk to us a little bit about what your forecast, or what's in your purview in terms of how shifting technologies, with brands, or, what's the wave of this uncertain future right now, through technology?
Yeah, I think, well, it's funny, the more I think, like, right now, it's even more important to be able to use technology to bring joy or a smile, or also ease of your daily life. Like, I think we could look at it in 2 things, right? There's opportunities where, and we've talked a lot about this, is, taking you guys are great at, building in concourse experience, right? For sporting events. Right now there's no events. Let's take those in concourse experience like you're doing, and offer those content creation moments from the user's couch. So
Sure.
I can become a bobblehead, of my favorite player, and I can, what you guys do. And I think that's great because, one, we need a little, everyone needs to be a bobblehead right now, right? We all
It
need a
never gets
little,
old. It never gets old.
I don't know if you'll want me as a bobblehead, but I'm saying, like, or like, we need those moments of fun, and we need those moments right now, I think, more than ever. And if technology can help us get some of those, that's one use case, which I think is great. Or, what we all do with voice, or I always laugh, these apps with the shopping, like, I'm like, it's funny, like, you think high tech, and I'm literally texting with my shopper, and I'm like, how is this high tech? It's just communicating with me, right? Like, that
Sure.
part of it, like, this whole, we're not going to the grocery store, and now I have some person out there shopping for me, and then nothing's ever available, and he's sending me photos of, like, I don't know if that's advanced yet. It's getting the job done right, but it's not the most pleasant experience having to spend 30 minutes with this person going back and forth on what soup I want. But with the technologies that can help is for the banking stuff, I if you get a check right now and you can't go to a bank, right? And the fact that we can just, deposit it online, like, thinking about those technologies, or on your phone, sorry, through a mobile app, those are things that can really help, as
Right.
well. So I think there's room right now more than ever for those fun content creation experiences, that you can, all of us are having happy hours with our friends via chat. I know my friends have sent me multiple apps. I forgot what they're called, but to, like, connect that way, just to kind of change it up a bit, or creating content. I was talking to my friend who went on a Zoom date the other night. And so, it's like, how are we using the streaming, like, I to still connect with people. And
Sure.
I think technology now more than ever is enabling us to do that, right? So you're connecting, whether it's like we're doing right now, we're connecting for everyday use to get groceries at the home, to help people. And then on the healthcare space, I mean, all of the doctors who can do telemedicine for non-emergency based, conditions for people is huge, right? We can, it doesn't work for every case, but I think that's so important right now, that you can communicate with someone, a doctor, get help, get advice, because, biggest thing we want to do is connect. And it's whatever that way is, whether it's for health, whether it's for simple grocery shopping. But then on the brand side of things, kind of going back to the fun piece of it is I think brands now more than ever can really find a way to connect with their fans using new content. So maybe I know a lot of stuff with AR and VR and is the content piece, right? Sometimes you have to shoot in a certain way in order to create the content to be used. But if we can work with brands and technology companies and say, like, hey, we might have an arsenal of 3D products or 3D assets, how can we take these and now use them through these apps or through a web experience and working with technology companies like yourself to say like how do we still connect with the consumer in these times when not they're not going to events. And I think it comes down to a few things. You guys are working with this cool the video messaging tool that you guys are going to be releasing. It's more of how can those fans still connect with athletes? How can those
Right.
and the athlete can be at home, right? And the fan can be at home. But the thing is you're keeping that conversation going, you're keeping, the excitement alive. Because the reason we all went to events was to have those moments, right? To have those
Sure.
moments with your friends, with those moments with the players and cheering them on. And I think we still need that in our life right now, like if we can do that from the couch and still interact with your favorite fan athlete or your favorite celebrity, that's a great way that brands could use tech right now to bring joy and or keep the momentum going so when we can go back into stadiums and go to concerts and whatnot, um we're still those true fans.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because one of the things that I had witnessed or at least observed early on is the absolute disservice that brands were missing out on an opportunity here where, of course, when something um, like a pandemic happens, I think there is an initial pause to kind of get your bearings, to understand, re-strategize, and then, really provide that or find that opportunity. But early on, I just saw this overall malaise within the brand community and the advertising community that everyone sort of fell silent. And of course, I think after a catastrophic event like this and one that really jars, the psyche of what our everyday life is, that's completely understandable. But working with sports teams for so long, I was just shocked how quiet they were on social. Even the larger brands, up until recently, and again, we're probably 6 weeks into this environment. Now you're starting to see some real emotional, connective advertising and commercials from these large brands. But for us, I think you're exactly right, and this is obviously something that we talked about internally: is how do we capture this audience where you have a undivided attention of millions of people right now, and the entire world is really circling the airport in this holding pattern where we're not really seeing the opportunity in brands and teams and celebrities, even entertainers, connecting with their real base. And so it's a big opportunity, and I think that's one that we've challenged ourselves with at MVP to really fill that void. And again, as luck may have it, as soon as we kind of come to an experience, things may open up again, and it'll be short-lived. Hopefully that is the case, but I think it is important that outside of the utility tech that you had mentioned, that brands really start focusing on mobile engagements and communicating with their fans. And you had referenced our new latest offering in which we're calling the fan portal, and that a highly branded microsite and video communication tool can be offered to provide this two-way communication between a team, a brand, an athlete, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of fans, and pretty seamlessly. And so, we're excited about the opportunity, and I'm hoping that brands collectively put their creative heads together and think of new ways to connect with us, where we could all use a good laugh right now, we could all use some comfort, we can all use some positivity, and I don't think brands should really miss out on this opportunity with their consumers. So
No, for sure, we all need to be bobbleheads.
that's right. Well, Natasha, one thing that we like to do with our guests is give a nice round of applause for you. I don't know if you can hear this on your end, but we are at our time, but this has been a great chat. Natasha, you had mentioned that you don't promote too much on social. If people want to contact you, what is the best way to reach you, or do you want to promote any sort of any plugs here
Yeah,
that
no, LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me. My name's spelled a little differently. It's Natascha, Natasha French. Is probably the best way to contact with me. And yeah, it's funny. I think all my social channels are private, but my content's not as good yet. I'm still kind of coming up with what my micro blogging site will be one day.
well,
But
hopefully we can
yeah,
help you
and
out with
also
that. Yeah.
what you guys doing at MVP Interactive is awesome. So I recommend all brands or agencies looking for ways and sports teams to engage with consumers or fans or just kind of talk it out to reach out to you guys as well. Because I think that's a good starting point is just what are the possibilities and going to experts like yourself and other technology companies and trying to understand how can they use tech correctly and also effectively. So um, big applaud to you guys as well for what you're doing and how you're innovating in times like this to still find ways for people to engage with each other.
Well, thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the latest MVP podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the social channels. We'll have this up and running over the next few days. And be sure to contact Natasha French on LinkedIn. I am James Gilio. You can also find me online. And until next time, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh, I hit the wrong soundboard. I hope that we'll have to cut that out. But here's the exit music.